Hey, what's up, entrepreneurship class? So today we're going to get back into talking about EOU, economics of one unit, and competitive pricing. So we're on chapter 14, part 2. So what are our objectives for 14, part 2? By the end of this chapter, you're going to be able to calculate your profit and profit margin. And also, you'll be able to analyze the considerations of pricing to stay competitive. So specifically, what are the trade-offs that entrepreneurs face when they're considering price changes? All right, so EOU stands for Economics of One Unit. So what does that mean? So entrepreneurs have to calculate what's called unit cost or per unit cost. So same thing I have to do with my salsa. All right, I have to figure out exactly what all my costs are going to be, all said and done, in order to figure out what I should charge per unit. So unit cost means calculating and attributing all of your cost to your individual units. Again, for example, 1 jar of salsa. So it sounds a little simpler than it really is. So we'll get into that in a little more detail, but let's talk about how to calculate profit. So you guys probably know this. It's very simple. So to calculate your profit, you basically take your sales price. So for example, my jars of salsa go for $5 each, and then subtract out your cost. And subtract out the cost. My total costs are around $3.35 or so. So that's about $1.65 of profit per unit. And then, of course, you can calculate that on an aggregate basis or on a total basis. So like over an entire year, I'll take my total revenues. So if I sold, 100 jars of salsa, then that's, $500 minus my total costs gives me my profit. So, and that gets me into profit margin. So profit margin is one of the most basic statistics that are used to analyze businesses. So your profit margin is basically your percentage. So you take your profit, divide it by your sales price, multiply by 100, and that gives you the percentage that you're making on each sale. So it depends on the industry. It's usually around in software, it can be upwards towards 70 to 80% profit margin. But for other things like, grocery stores, things like that, they have a very, very small profit margin. It can be as low as, 5 to 10%. But that's how you calculate it. We'll look at some more examples as we go here. So there's actually a good example on page 256 of your book. So economics of one unit. So let's go through this together. The example is an entrepreneur buys backpacks and then decorates them with hand-drawn art and stitching and that sort of stuff, and sells them at a flea market for $25 each. Now, this is a very simple example, but this breaks down the individual costs. So if you look at the plain backpack, this entrepreneur spends $11 per backpack, spends $3 on the materials, so ink, thread, buttons, etc., and then calculates $6 per unit for labor. It doesn't get into how they calculate that, but basically sounds like this entrepreneur is paying themselves about $6 per unit, or probably just averaging out. That's probably 2 backpacks an hour at $12 an hour, probably something like that. Expense per unit of sale comes to a total of $20. So all in all, it's costing this entrepreneur $20 to make this backpack that they're going to sell. The selling price of $25, and then of course subtract out your $20 cost, gives you a $5 profit per unit. And then if you look down at the bottom, it shows you how to calculate the percentage on that. So $5 divided by your $25 sale price, $5 being your profit, your per unit profit, $25 your per unit price times 100 gives you a 20% profit margin. Not bad, not good, but really these things are only important, or they're only meaningful when they're compared to other things that are similar. So if there's a whole industry of people making decorating backpacks, then you can compare the profit margins across the board. So in this example, there are material costs of about $14. That's 11 for the backpack and 3 for all of the other stuff, ink, thread, buttons. Labor cost of $6. Profit margin, or sorry, profit of $5 per unit. Profit margin 20%, as we talked about. So it's a good example. However, very, very simple. The businesses you guys are talking about, the business that I run, much more complex, because there are things called fixed costs, including variable costs. So they're fixed and variable. So let's get into what that means. So we have fixed costs and we have variable costs. So not all costs are tied directly to the creation of units or to the rendering of services. Let's say if you're, a videographer, for example. So you can't just say, oh, okay, well, I am, shooting, a 1 hour video that takes me 5 hours of time on site, and it costs me this much labor and this much for this much for that. There's other things that are fixed that are not directly tied to that creation. Let's say one example would be like office space. So Ryan, let's say you start renting an office for your business, right? Your office space is going to cost you, depends where you open your office, obviously, but it's going to cost you whatever, $500 to $1,500 per month. And it doesn't matter how many units you sell or how many videos you shoot. It doesn't matter. That's going to be the same cost every month. That is a fixed cost. Whereas how much you work, there's going to be variable costs there, like transportation. I mean, if you're not working, if you're not shooting, then that means you're not paying people. So labor would be a variable cost, and it depends on what you're doing. Things like fees and insurance, you're going to have to pay your insurance no matter what, and it doesn't matter whether you're shooting one video or 1,000 videos. Doesn't matter. Your office supplies, for the most part, that doesn't matter either. How much you're actually producing. But you have to take all of these, and this is where it gets a little more complicated. You have to take all those things and factor them into your cost as well. For example, like one way you might do that, let's say, Jalen, if you might have, you would need to have insurance in the business that you're proposing. You need to have some sort of, insurance for your business. So you would need to take whatever that insurance cost is. It's not too much, maybe a few $100 a year. I think I pay, it was either $199 or $299 per year. But I would need to take that and say, all right, so if I am going to sell, 500 jars of salsa this year, then I need to factor that $299 into the total cost of my salsa and add that as a cost. So there are those types of costs as well. It's not as simple as buying one backpack and buying 5 buttons and a little bit of ink, and then putting a profit margin on top of it and then selling it. It's not always that expensive. So when you guys are calculating this or estimating your costs, you have to think about other costs like that. And a lot of times it's really just a guess, especially when you're first starting out. You might estimate, Ryan, that you're going to shoot, you're going to have 12 jobs over a year. You might have one per month to start out. So your costs are going to be a little bit higher, or your fixed costs are going to be a little bit higher per unit because you're only having 12 jobs. Maybe a year from then, maybe you have 20 next year. Maybe you have 30 the year after that. So you just have to estimate it as accurately as possible and sort of back into a number that you can then get an accurate per unit cost. So something that consumes entrepreneurs. How can you make more money? How can you improve your profits? So there are 3 basic ways you can do that. So the first is reducing your material costs. So maybe those backpacks in the example, maybe instead of getting, really nice, LL Bean backpacks, you get cheaper ones, ones that only cost maybe $8 or $9, and you're saving a couple of bucks. Another way is to increase productivity. Productivity is actually an economic term. I could actually probably do an entire chapter on the economics of productivity and what it actually means. But productivity can be thought of basically as reducing your labor cost per unit. So you can think of it as simply being more efficient, creating more units, per given amount of time. So that's how like factories estimate, they calculate their productivity, and then they try to increase it. So if you can create 100 units in a day, in an 8-hour day, then they'd want to find ways to create 120 in an 8-hour day, without increasing their costs. So that way you reduce your labor cost per unit. So increasing your productivity is a way to improve your profits. Or very simply, increase your selling price. That's something that I actually do. Like when I go to farmers markets, I incur additional costs. So, for example, you have to, and one thing that was kind of left out of that backpack example, when you go to the flea market, you have to pay to go to a flea market. You pay, fees that I've heard of, it's like $25 or $50 a table, and you pay that no matter what. You might sit there and not sell a single thing, and you're going to lose money. However, increasing your selling price is an option when you're in situations like that. That's what I do. I go to a farmer's market, and there's they usually do some sort of like a $20 cost and then like 10% of sales, something like that. So I increase my price for the day. I sell for $6 per jar when I go to places like that, because my margins are already pretty slim. So I don't want to, barely make any money when I go to these kinds of places. So I increase my prices when I go to them. So those are the basic ways you can improve your profits, but that leaves entrepreneurs with the constant burning questions, all right? All these things come with trade-offs, all right? So, and entrepreneurs have to assess the trade-offs all the time of doing these kinds of things. So the first question that you need to ask yourself as an entrepreneur, if you're thinking about decreasing your material costs, you need to ask yourself, can I do that without impacting quality? And if you can, if you just find some sort of, if you find the same exact materials from a different supplier and it's cheaper, fantastic. I mean, that's perfect. Another way, as businesses scale up, you get volume discounts. So for example, I used to go to the supermarket and I would buy, a few bags worth of tomatoes at a time, and I'm paying like $2.99 to, $3.50 a pound. I don't do that anymore. I go to this, specialty produce market where I'm paying like $1 a pound, because I can buy a lot more. I buy like 3 boxes at a time instead. So I'm not impacting the quality of my product when I do that. I'm just reducing my cost. And you can do those kinds of things with things like volume discounts. You can go to your supplier and say, listen, how much will it cost me if I order 100 backpacks instead of 10? And that's a way you can decrease costs without impacting quality. But a lot of times, maybe your quality is at a point that isn't the best for your market. Maybe you can get away with a lower quality product. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish, what your product is, what your market is. But that's a major burning question that impacts all entrepreneurs. Can I decrease my costs without impacting quality? Can I reduce labor costs ethically and in a cost-effective manner? So one way that entrepreneurs reduce labor costs is to, hire less qualified people. And is that going to impact your quality? That goes back to question one. Then ethically, I think we've talked about Walmart. They used to be in real trouble because they decided that they were going to fire or at least decrease the hours of a lot of their full-time workers. And they reduced basically everybody in the store. There were very few full-time workers in their stores, so they didn't have to pay for health insurance anymore. So they had a bunch of part-time workers, and that was a way that they reduced their costs. And is it ethical? Boy, they got in a lot of trouble for it, and they've had to reverse course on it. So another big question, how do I reduce my labor costs ethically and in a cost-effective manner? Is it cost-effective to hire less talented, less qualified people and pay them less? I don't know. That's something you have to figure out for your product. So I'll leave it at that. It's a question, and it all really depends. You got to figure that out for yourself. And then finally, will an increase in price, let's say if you go with that third option of just boosting your price up, will an increase in price still allow my product to be competitive in the market? So if I say, if at that flea market, sorry, at that flea market, if I'm selling, 20 backpacks and I'm selling out, I have no competition and I'm selling out in 20 minutes, then yeah, I think you can increase your prices. If there are 20 people selling very similar types of backpacks that are customized, maybe you can't get away with it. It really all depends. But again, it's a burning question that consumes entrepreneurs. If I increase my prices, is it still going to be competitive? You got to figure that out. You got to look at your competitors, see what they offer, see what sort of value their products offer their customers, and see if yours are similar. And if you increase your prices, are you going to price yourself out of the market? So these are the big trade-offs that entrepreneurs face. And that sums up chapter 14. So let's review our objectives. So explain to me. I'll set this into 2 questions, but what's the basic way to calculate profit? And second of all, what is the formula for calculating profit margin? And secondly, what are the considerations of pricing to stay competitive? Specifically, what are the trade-offs that entrepreneurs have to face all the time, have to deal with? What are those 3 burning questions that they have to always be asking themselves? All right, great. Well, that sums up chapter 14. Email me any questions, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.